Hi, welcome back. This podcast is going to be dealing with transpersonal psychotherapy, the active imagination. I've got a good friend of the podcast, Allan Frater, author of Waking Dreams. So, Alan's latest book, which he kindly sent me, and I have read it, Alan. I've dealt with my social media depleted attention and I persevered. Not that I needed to persevere because it wasn't a good read. I just needed to persevere in order to get the juice and to really take in the richness of this book, Psychosynthesis Psychotherapy in Experiential Context. Alan, welcome.
Thank you, Noel. Lovely. Yeah, we're all fighting back against the fragmented attention span. 100%. Yeah, I'm all about that. Yeah, looking forward to seeing where you went to with the book. And yeah, we spoke, what, 5 years ago with Waking Dreams, my first book.
And we
And
were
you were the first sort of podcasty thing that I did. And I was really nervous and it's just fun to look back and it's crazy 5 years have gone by, but it's good to be back here with you and following up with where things have gone to.
yeah,
Still talking about imagination, basically. Yeah.
yeah. It's just on that, Alan. We were just saying before we hit record, yeah, the passage of time. Maybe it obviously is an aging thing, but it's maybe we get more existential the older we get. But the passage of time, I just think from, COVID, say, we're now what, talking 6 and a bit years. Where does the time go?
Well, I'm sitting in my mum's got elderly parents that I'm keeping an eye on. I'm in my mum's craft room, and so I'm walking around where I used to live when I was a kid. And what comes to mind is that the summer holidays were like 6 weeks long, and it felt like forever. And it'd be time would be much slower back then.
Yeah,
And it speeds up as you get older. Some people say that's because relatively speaking, 6 weeks is quite a chunk of your life if you've only had 10 years already.
yeah,
Whereas if you've had 50 years, 6 weeks is proportionally less time. But I think the technology speeds us up to go back to the attention span thing. I think there is a mania in the culture and things are fast, fast, fast. We're not living in a world where the post would come once a day.
mm.
It's like you can check your emails 100 times a day and all through the night if you want to. It's like we're very connected. It's like it's harder to slow down and reach that sort of baseline regulation. Uh, so yeah, need to fight back against the machine.
Yeah, we do. And we won't even mention AI, or we might later. So, Alan, like I said, I have got lots of notes, and the first thing I'll say, and I say this with genuine honesty, I found it a fascinating book. It was also a book that really helped inform me of psychosynthesis because like we briefly kind of ran into each other at the Psychosynthesis Trust a few years ago. I did supervision training there, but I didn't do my initial training there, which was CCP in West London. So I didn't ever really have a source for me to go
Mhm.
to kind of go, what's this psychosynthesis malarkey, right? And having read your book and taken lots of notes, it really opened up for me, quite apart from the imagination aspect, but how to actually frame psychosynthesis within an intricative transpersonal model of working. And so I found it incredible, very coherent, and the book, had a flow that gave me just was very informing, very insightful, and I just thought it was a book that you would must be proud of, right?
I'm very happy with it. Yes. Yeah. Um, Proud of. Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. It's it's a funny feeling having published this book. Lots of different feelings. Um, I never planned to write a book on psychosynthesis, so I never really thought I had something new to say about psychosynthesis until I did, which maybe we'll get into. Um, but in the writing of the book, it kind of, I mean, it started out as a short essay,
Mm.
and then it grew into a series of essays. And then when I pitched it to the publisher, it was going to be just a short book, like 100 pages. But it grew in size to longer than my first book. It's like I think 280 pages long. And it sort of gathered momentum as I engaged in the process, and it became I sort of aligned myself with something that wanted to happen. There was a sense of it. I mean, I don't want to be too woo-woo too early in the conversation, but it was like it wasn't just me that was writing this book. I was writing something down and engaging in listening. And that's always beautiful for a writer where you feel like you're onto something. You're not forcing it too much. I mean, there's a lot of effort that you need to put in every day. I mean, there is a discipline and a concentration and a dedication to the task. But the lovely thing about writing is the more creative aspect where you get a bit stuck and you go away for a walk with the dog and then you have a little solution and then things start to join up and there's a coherence that grows over the weeks and the months. Um, so it tells my story, but also it's very satisfying in the sense that it does articulate an understanding of psychosynthesis that I'd been gestating and working towards for over 20 years. And I think it's yeah, it's very satisfying to have put that on paper and to be pushing that out into the world and to hearing how it's landing with other people and what that might do for psychosynthesis and what other people might do with what I've written. So yeah, I'm happy. Yeah.
But does it actually feel like there's almost like a part of your soul that you've shared? Does it feel like that? That there's there's a big part of you that's now out there?
Right. Well, I don't really, yeah, you could think about it like that. I mean, I think there is something vulnerable making about writing any book. I think both books that I've written is like there is a sort of ambivalence around publication day because all that creative process that I talk about that happens the other side of publication day. It's all very sort of personal and private, and maybe you share it with a handful of early readers. So there is a sort of courage and a trepidation in putting it out into the world. But it is, I mean, I've had people read it who know me quite well, and they've said that they can really hear me in the book, and it is like a sort of, it is like hanging out with me. So it is the tone of me is in the book. I am woven into the book, and it is woven into me. Um, yeah, I
Maybe.
think, I mean, just on that, I was, I mean, the sort of dramatic thing around that vulnerability is that I knew from early on in the writing process that I would, for the book to land and for it to go out into the world and do the work that I hoped it would, I needed to get the blessing of like psychosynthesis teachers from the generation before me,
Mm.
the original generation that were taught by Assagioli. So psychosynthesis was dreamed up by Roberto Assagioli in the early 20th century, and he taught in the 70s a bunch of quite interesting characters from all over Italy, the States, and they're still teaching. They're around, and they've written their books on psychosynthesis. So I reached out to Molly Young Brown, in the first instance, who's a wonderful psychosynthesis writer. And she was very encouraging through the writing process. I'm very grateful to her. And she agreed to write the foreword
Yeah.
to the book. And Diana Whitmore and Piero Frucci, they wrote endorsements. And that was a weird journey to sort of, it's like the book got blessed and I got blessed. And it's kind of like it's allowed me to sort of feel accepted in a weird way. Because I've always, because there's something different about this book. It's not your normal book on psychosynthesis. It kind of twists things. It kind of moves things along. It gives a different perspective. Um, and people seem to appreciate that. So that's good. I think that's what psychosynthesis is, and what it points us towards is to disidentify, to change, to grow, not just to repeat the past.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. Assagioli, so University of Florence, wasn't it? 1910, I think his thesis went to the university, was submitted to the University of Florence. Now, around that time,
And
we had great, sorry,
yeah. Well, there's a little line where she says, "You're more than your book." She wisely said one day, "You're more than your book." That was during the editing process when I was kind of caught up in dialoguing with the editor and, debating over lines and sentences. Yeah, because when I sent off the final manuscript, a little voice whispered in my ear, "What was that all about?"
right.
And he was like, just let go on a level." Yeah. So yeah, I'm proud of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So Assagioli, University of Florence, 1910. So around that time, you had obviously the people that are well known, Freud, Jung, and others. And he was also a psychiatrist, right?
Assagioli.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he was a medical doctor,
yeah.
trained in the medical profession, and I mean, I don't think psychotherapy as such existed back then. Um, I think psychosynthesis has become much more about psychosynthesis psychotherapy subsequent to Assagioli. I think originally he saw himself as an educator.
Mm.
He liked to use the word pedagogical rather than psychological. Apparently, I just learned that recently. So pedagogy, like education or teaching. Um, but yeah, he was around, and he was the first Italian to be trained as a psychoanalyst. He was not taught immediately by Freud, but by Bluber, I think I'm pronouncing it
Mm.
right, the man who invented schizophrenia, or named it anyway. Um, he was a contemporary with Carl Jung, so they both trained in psychoanalysis about the same time, Jung and Saggioli. Um, and they both, what's the word? Apostate. They both broke with Freud for similar reasons. Another thing I learned recently, Freudian psychoanalysis is a discipline, whereas psychosynthesis is a field. I may or may not be right about this, but discipline in the sense that it speaks to why they broke from Freud. So discipline in the sense that this is how we do it, this is how we understand it. There's a body of work that we want to adhere to, Freudian psychoanalysis. Whereas what gave me the permission and the inspiration to write this book is that Saggioli, 2 points. He says there's no orthodoxy in psychosynthesis. Even the original presentation that he made isn't the orthodoxy. He says it's just a beginning. He talks about his presentation as psychosynthesis being in an adolescence, and that it's for others. The second point is that he wanted others to develop it, to take it further. And I just really ran with that in this book and did something a little bit different. But yeah, he was there back in the day. He wrote a PhD thesis on psychoanalysis,
Mm.
the title of which was Psychosynthesis. And that's early on in the book I talk about that, and that's the kind of it's a nice way into understanding the difference. Because synthesis is has the opposite meaning to analysis. So analysis is to analyze, to break down the complexity of the psyche into its parts, to understand it in that way. Whereas synthesis is the opposite, is to bring together the disparate parts to create a wholeness. So he emphasized the gathering together and the integration or the synthesis of the psyche. And he saw psychological life as a ever increasing process of synthesis. But yeah, he was around. He lived through a very interesting time in modern psychology. Yes.
So, talking about integration, I mean, if Carl Jung was sitting pulled up a chair next to us on a bar stool, how would he, when he talked about integration and individuation, how would he distinguish the difference with the synthesis that Assagioli advocated?
What's the difference between Carl Jung and Assagioli, and how they differently talk about things? Well, they were very similar. I think the first thing is to say the similarities between them are quite close. There is there's some stuff in the psychosynthesis literature and the differences that's never really satisfied me. Normally because it assumes that, well, if we back up a little bit, you have to think about, first of all, well, what do you mean by psychosynthesis and what do you mean by Jungian psychoanalysis? And these are complex bodies of work, both of which have changed over the time of the life of their originators, never mind subsequently. So it's difficult to sort of, I mean, when you say what's the difference, you'd have to sort of take a snapshot. So Jung's thinking changed throughout his life. Sagioli's also. Jung's maybe a bit more radically. Um, I think the main difference for me would be that Assagioli maintained an adherence to the premise that psychosynthesis was a science and a scientific discipline in the sense of an empirical science. Whereas Jung um, started out in that way. They all did back then.
Mm,
Freud, Jung, Assagioli. There was I talk about it in the book as a dream of a science. They all wanted the fledgling discipline of psychology to be a science with the same stature as physics, chemistry, biology. They saw themselves as turning the observation of empirical science away from the planets and plants
mm.
towards the inner world. And that was the metaphor that Assagioli drew upon, and we still do in psychosynthesis quite a bit. I talk about that quite a lot in the book, for good and ill. Jung became much more mystical later in his life and abandoned that sort of dualism between the idea of a sort of subjective observer that can stand back and notice the contents of psychological life. He whereas Assagioli maintained that sense of a sort of inner psyche, a sort of the idea of a center. So in psychosynthesis, I think integration would be around a center, a unifying center, the I they call it. And you cohere, you bring together all the different elements of the personality, and you create this unifying center that then allows you to contact transpersonal self. Um, I don't know if that's there in Jungian psychoanalysis as clearly as that.
It's there in IFS though. If you look at
Oh
dictionary,
yeah, it's definitely there in IFS. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. And parts work and all that. That's a very there's a very close. alignment in internal family systems to how some people do psychosynthesis. Um,
Everything gets reinvented, doesn't it? What's original and what's
well, I kind of threw away that idea of a center. I do critique that and offer an alternative understanding in the book. I've never found my center. I've never found my
mm,
I. I think it's a nice metaphor. Um, your picks. I mean, the psyche. What is psyche? What is
mm.
psychological life? You can't measure it on a set of scales. You can't like look at it through a microscope. So to talk about it, to think about it, to discuss psychological life, we need metaphors. We need to say it's a bit like this,
Mm.
something familiar and known. So the I, the point of the center in psychological life from which we can observe the passing of feelings and thoughts and sensations and memories and things. And we're picturing psychological life as if we're the scientist who's being objective, as objective as he or she can, and is observing the world,
Mm.
plants, planets. But it's just a story. There isn't really an I there as such. Um, that sort of turns into a sort of belief system in a way that you have this I, which is not wrong. I mean, it can be helpful, but for me, the subtitle of the book is Psychosynthesis in Experiential Context. And before we get caught up in the weeds of this theory and that theory, I suppose the headline for the book is I'm trying to write a book about psychosynthesis that emphasizes what's the experience.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to try and get distracted. It's very easy to get distracted from what the experience is by abstract ideas and concepts.
Yeah.
And then the next step would be to try and fit your experience into the concepts. For me, all these theories are ways to help you notice your experience more fully and to test out the theory if it's any good. And a good theory for me is one that better aligns to your experience.
Because I was listening to Gabor Mate recently, and his book, The Myth of the Normal, which I think is a fascinating read. Now he was drawing distinction between what a cure is, you know, removal of disease. So you go in,
Mm,
you have a manualized approach, there's clinical guidelines, and you're fixed. Bit like if you go to, I don't know, if you went to the hospital and your something
mm.
needs fixed in one of your limbs is broken, you would hope that someone is not a butcher from the bush who's gonna mess with your body, but they're gonna fix your body holistically and every other way that aligns with good practice. But he makes the point, and I kind of think I have a lot of sympathy with what he says, that healing, becoming whole, and becoming authentic implies that the practitioner, unlike the oncologist or the surgeon, has to do their own work.
Yes,
Because if they don't, they're asking someone to go to somewhere that they haven't gone themselves. Now, you don't need to have had cancer to be a good oncologist,
true.
but if you're asking someone to deal with early traumas and you
Mhm.
haven't dealt with your own shit, then what does that say for the therapy?
Yes, I mean, and also everyone's experience is different. So you yes to what you've said, and also I don't know what it's like to be a pregnant woman and go through childbirth. And yeah, I've had a lot of such clients.
Yeah.
So the imagination comes in then. And even if I was a woman who'd gone through childbirth, that client's experience of that would be different to mine. So I think, but yeah, it's not a cure. It's I mean, Thomas More talks about care of the soul. Um, I mean, my analogy to contrast or give an alternative to that sort of you've got a broken leg that needs to be fixed and you get returned to having a non-broken leg. My analogy would be to a forest. I use quite a lot of ecological metaphors. And the forest, maybe there's an invasive species comes along and takes over a region of the forest or spreads through the forest. Maybe a government drives a road through the forest. Maybe there's a drought or a fire. But in all these different ways, the forest is impinged upon through time by changes, events, experiences. Now, the forest won't go back to how it was before. The forest isn't going to get rid of the road or the invasive species
Or the tower blocks.
or the tower blocks. Um, I mean, arguably, it might recover or grow back after a fire, but it will be scarred somehow. There's no going back to how it was before. But the forest as a complex system, if you like, there's no center of control to go back to what we said earlier. There's no center to the forest that's organizing its response. There's just a network of relationships between all the plants and animals and the sun
Mm.
and the wind and the rain. And the forest does respond in a self-organizing fashion, and it will slowly adapt to the invasive species, to the road, and it will move forwards, and it will be recognizably the same forest, and yet it will have changed. And I think that's a nice analogy for psychological change that's helpful because often when people come to psychotherapy, it's kind of like they're a broken down Ford and they'd really, really like to just become a Porsche or something like that.
Mm.
It's like they want to transform themselves into something completely different. And of course, that's not what happens.
Mm.
And then there's always this question, have I really changed? Because we've got this kind of almost like black and white notion of what change means, but it's much more subtle than that. And I think it's not a cure, it's not a going backwards. And definitely in psychosynthesis, we're trying to help people move forwards in their lives and face it. Life's always coming at you. There's always invasive species. There's these people or experiences. You lose your job, or there's a bereavement. There's things happening in the world. There's wars that are freaking you out. There's technology being changed. And this how I talk about it is the story that we have about who we are in the world eventually doesn't work so well anymore because it
Mm.
doesn't have the narrative capacity to make meaningful sense of these new unscripted happenings. And the strapline on the back of the book is therapy is a time between stories, a slow reimagining of self and world. And that's a movement forwards into a new story. And you can't squeeze the client into a new story. And I don't know what that's going to be, and neither do they. But I think as a therapist, what you do need is some kind of skill in providing the conditions, the therapeutic
Yeah.
conditions, the process conditions to, in my language, help the client to cultivate their imagination and then to look out for and notice the new behaviors, the new feelings, the new understandings, and then slowly synthesizing that into a new story and then beginning to risk that in the world. So yeah, you're not curing people. I mean, the ethical dilemma there is that people often want to be just cured and put back to how they were before.
Mm.
Um, which is fine, and you need to respect that and show some understanding. But that doesn't mean that we necessarily. Well, I don't think you can do that. I think life's always trying to move forwards. It's not what I'm offering people. So they'll get more than they bargain for, maybe.
Do you know, when I was reading the book, I was sitting with a running commentary in my own head, which was, what is psychosynthesis? What is the coherence? What makes it distinct? What are the limits? And so on. And I thought, when you went into writing about that, you were very aware of that tension in describing something that's not finite or concrete. Like these are a set of techniques, concepts, even the 12 points of the training paper were just a foundation or an influence. It wasn't something concrete to say, this is psychosynthesis, and this then is how a personal transformation manifests. And not seeking a final destination of, quote, truth. Now, I love that. But often, and often in a short-term counseling model, sometimes informed by people just needing to be fixed. When you
Hmm.
ask someone, oh, in the exploration phase, maybe the preparation or the frustration phase, it might be, but in a short-term model, you ask someone, what should we talk about today? And they say, you tell me.
Hmm.
How do you deal with that?
If someone didn't know what they wanted to say.
Yeah, they want you to fix them.
Ah, right, okay. Um, in a short-term way.
Well, my experience is that sometimes people approaching a sh therapy counseling sessions for a short term, 6 or 8 or 10,
Yes.
they have this idea that there's a
Yeah.
manualized,
Yeah.
determined approach, a methodology to
Mhm.
personal transformation, whereby at the end of the sixth or eighth or 10th session, they will go away almost fixed.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, no, I get the question. Um, well, another analogy comes to mind, and I use this quite a lot. So for example, if somebody says to me, "I don't know what to say. What do you think I should say? Why am I here? How are you going to help me?" I mean, I think that's fair enough. Um, and I think therapists should be able to speak to that. And broadly speaking, without knowing any details, I would say something like, "Well, I'm guessing you're here because your life's not working for whatever reason, and that's got maybe that's been bugging you for a while, but it's got worse now, and because probably you didn't want to come to therapy. You'd rather not be here, and you're hoping that talking to me is going to help you navigate this difficulty. Um, for me, that's a process of change. Maybe we need to help you let go of that way of being that isn't working anymore for whatever reason. Maybe something's happened, like I said a minute ago, something's happened in your life that you're trying struggling to get your head around with the normal approach. So for me, it's a bit like a caterpillar. A caterpillar doesn't plan to become a butterfly. It just feels a bit sick one day and doesn't want to eat the leaves at the end of the branches, and it finds itself building a little house to hide away from the world. And it builds a chrysalis to protect itself while it's basically sort of falling apart. And I think that's what the consulting room is in a way. It's a kind of chrysalis where you, client, person, might have an opportunity to talk about some things that are difficult that you can't really talk about out there while you're trying to keep things going and people are expecting things of you. But when we come to therapy, which is just a chance to step back and to begin to wonder about what's not working and also what else might be beginning to happen. And just like the caterpillar has never thought about flying through the sky, never mind having colorful wings,
Hmm.
who knows where you might end up in. So I try and speak to a temporal process. I try and give people a sense of time passing by and the need to think about the past in the present, but we're all moving into the future, and that we're going to do that together. In terms of short-term therapy, I think there's lots of dangers there. of putting pressure on certainly the client, but also the therapist can be put under pressure. There's a sort of machine-like pressure that comes with, after 10 sessions, you'll have 10 times more change than in one session kind of
Yeah,
thing. There's a sort
yeah.
of linear assumptions. And I would be acting against that within myself and in how I talk about things. And for me, I don't buy into the whole kind of solution focused approach. It's like when I'm doing short term work, it's like I'm pretty much doing what I do in long term work. I'm just, even if I've just got 1 hour, it's like I'm just putting faith in the quality of my attention and the relationship that I have with the client and how I articulate that and the benefits of that. And I try to do that without forcing anything because I think that's counterproductive. And then
Mm.
someone will at least take away that they've had an hour with someone that's allowed them not to feel like they're a problem to be fixed. And that in itself is the genesis of maybe what they need. Because I think if you force the change and buy into the pressure the client's under, that can kind of collude with something that's not very helpful. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, because often, and I liked your example of needing patience with in one of the stages. It could have been the incubation stage.
Incubation stage,
Yeah,
yes. Mm.
of just being present. Just slightly left field here. Willie Mullins, the champion Irish horse race trainer, I was listening to him being interviewed, and because he's winning everything, he's always been, godlike figure in the industry, and people want to interview him. And what's the magic sauce, and what's your techniques, blah blah blah. And people were expecting his training regime and his whatever. And what I was impressed by was he said, you need a lot of patience. There's so much in that. Now, when I was reading the book, I jotted this down and I hope I can articulate it. Me and my theories and my readings and my CPD, waiting for a client to come, I was thinking, how can I get this stage and this transformation moving along? And I remember being at the Psychosynthesis Trust. It was one of the rooms, G5 or something, at the front, where ordinarily I'd be thinking, oh God, I hope it's not too noisy at the front, on Tooley Street. But this one morning, the client was late or maybe didn't show. And I was sat there and suddenly I felt a tremendous peace where the traffic flow from Tooley Street, which could potentially be oppressive and irritating, became melodic.
Mm.
Now, Alan, I didn't have that every day, but I had that in that moment.
Yes. Mm.
And
And you
that
take that
was
away with you. Yeah.
And that came about not from sitting there, closing my eyes and getting into, like you say, a ritual, but just sitting there and allowing my imagination to open.
Mm. Nice. Yeah. You need patience and just uh, give attention to your experience and allow something new to emerge and have faith that something will happen. Like another ecological metaphor would be, you plant the seeds.
Yeah,
You prepare the ground and you plant the seeds. So you need to put effort in. You think about the client or whatever it is, or you do your therapy training, or you go to supervision. So you do your thinking, and you process the difficult feelings or whatever, and then you need to like let those seeds do what they do. They're under the ground. You don't know what's happening, and you certainly don't want to dig them up to check on them because that'll screw it all up. Um, so there are conscious and deliberate steps that we can take, but I think therapy is I think it's an art form. It's certainly a creative process, and therefore it's not all about conscious and deliberate. step-by-step mechanical procedures. There's a sense of trust or faith or letting go and allowing something unexpected or spontaneous to arise. Oh,
How
so just,
interesting. We're talking about something waiting to arise, and then the broadband freezes.
ah, digital countertransference, the ghost in the machine. Oh, want to sensitize ourselves to those messages from self, as we say in psychosynthesis. Um, yeah, which is mysterious.
Yeah, very. Um, there's I like that idea, the artful approach, because there has to be that question as a therapist about when someone is ready for something that might be more of a creative technique and tool, lots of which you outline in the book. I'm thinking of maybe, maybe the empty chair or removing the chair. And when and how safely do you pace the timing of interventions with presentation
Yes.
material? Yeah.
Um, well, the fun thing about writing the chapter on techniques, I mean, psychosynthesis has lots of techniques, famously so. Um, and Assagioli's main book on psychosynthesis, like the loads and loads and loads and loads of techniques. Um, so when I was training, just to say why I'm backing up here is that because in some ways that your question doesn't it used to make sense to me, your question, but it doesn't anymore. But I'll swing around and make sense of it, which is that I use things called techniques that we would do, and the rest of the time we weren't using techniques.
Mhm.
And in large part, that was because when I first started seeing clients, we weren't allowed to do any techniques with the client for the first 6 to 8 weeks. We were taught that we needed to build the therapeutic relationship where we allowed to roll out the red carpet of all these psychosynthesis techniques. So it gave the assumption, the belief that the technique was a sort of set piece technique that was contained within something that wasn't the techniques. That meant that after qualification, quite quickly, I just dropped doing these techniques altogether because
Right.
I felt like I think a lot of people do this as well, which is a real shame in a way. Strong word, shame, but for me, they felt a bit forced or a bit like we were saying earlier about putting pressure on people. Sit down. And it can create a lot of performance anxiety in the client. And in some ways, it can interrupt the therapy because you're now like
Yeah.
doing a technique, and there's a sense, why are we doing this, and is it going to work? And um, but in the book, I roll back on that and talk about, well, what is a technique? And a technique is some kind of method or procedure or craft that's designed to achieve a particular outcome or purpose. And I go back to what Assagioli says, and he's got a wonderful, very short section in that book that I mentioned. It's just got an introductory section on techniques where he talks in what they are and the purpose of the entire endeavor, which is psychosynthesis.
Hmm.
So what does that mean? That means, in my language, psychosynthesis is you're trying to gather together the disparate elements of the psyche into a synthesis. Suffering happens when we identify and become cut off from our wider potential. So as a psychosynthesis therapist, you're always trying to soften the boundaries or the limitations of that identification and allow more experiencing, disidentification, we call it. So in that sense, even just smiling at the client is a technique, or
Yeah.
deciding not to smile at the client, or
Or as
expressing
you
your
say, how you sit in the room.
empathy, like the core counseling, like the person-centered counseling skills, empathy, unconditional positive regard.
Mm.
I think empathy is like a massive technique in this sense. Um, and so for me in the book, what was fun about writing the techniques chapter is that I very much weave my application of techniques into the session. So they're not announced as such. I don't say to the client, let's do a technique. Um, I rarely these days will invite them to close their eyes, even like this. That
Mm.
happens in a lot of these techniques. Quite happy to get people to imagine without closing their eyes. And if you are going to try out something that looks a bit more like a technique, you would want to do it in the middle of the hour, if you like. So broadly speaking, a session for me would be I spend the first third of the session gathering the insights into the client, listening to myself, because I think the technique comes from me and from the client and the relationship between us
Yeah.
and the client. The timing of all those things needs to come together. And then there'll be an opportunity for some more experiential engagement beyond simple dialogue, perhaps. Um, and that might, but you'd want to finish that with lots of time afterwards to ground it or to reflect on how it was. You don't want to just throw people out into the street, um, into, reflective estate. But that was your question, right? Like the timing.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, it's very difficult to it's so dependent on the various components that it's in a way it's such a general question that lacks the specifics.
I
What?
think I think that speaks to something important, which is that you need to be really flexible in your application of techniques, and that's another emphasis in the book. As Assagioli says, situation of the client, the therapist, and the relationship, and he talks about combining different techniques together, and or maybe inventing your own techniques, and I make quite a big deal out of that
Yeah.
in the book and the importance of that, as opposed to because the danger is you sort of take a technique off the shelf because there's lots of like step-by-step techniques in the literature on psychosynthesis, and you do this first, then you do that, and the outcome's going to be this,
Yeah.
and you're trying to get them to have an insight or to have a particular feeling or to express a particular behavior. There's a narrow outcome that the technique's leading the person towards, and you're using the technique to achieve experience. For me, there's yeah, okay, maybe, but for me, that the outcome needs to be quite broad. We don't know what the outcome of the technique is going to be because life's uncertain and unpredictable. Technique for me is more about applying the conditions to allow a process to emerge. So the outcome is whatever it is. The person might be upset, they might be angry, they might understand this or that. Um, and that's the creative aspect of it. That's the artistic aspect of it. That's
Mm.
the fun part of it that you're not just treating the person like a machine, like they're a car in a
Yeah.
garage, and you know that if you pull a lever, something's going to happen. You don't. People aren't.
So you're not issuing MOT certificates then, no?
Well, that would be going back to your sort of medical model. You're curing people, you're
Yeah,
fixing the
yeah.
car. For me, people are not broken down engines. Um,
What
but
about Rollo May when he said the purpose of therapy is to set people free?
ah, I would entirely agree with that. I think I wrote this book, and somebody asked me the other day, "What do you want people to take from reading the book?" And I was like, "I want it to set people free. I want it to allow people to distinguish between fitting themselves into a theory or a framework or a technique and otherwise." So yeah, we're trying to set people free, broadly speaking, in an ethical way. I mean, freedom doesn't just mean do what you want and
Yeah, to hell with
get on
everyone
the
else.
small guy. Yeah. So there's problems about freedom um, if you go too far. But yeah, we want to set people free from their limitations, I suppose, and step into a wider life. Yeah.
So let's start sort of maybe drawing this now to uh sadly a conclusion. And apologies to the listeners for the it's going to sound a little bit clunky the last few minutes with the internet connection, unfortunately. And hopefully people's patience will stay with us if they've missed certain little nuggets of sentences. Um, so so I'm sitting with that, but also just also sitting, Alan, with what you may have had or have that we didn't discuss that you'd like to discuss, and what we didn't. I mean, there's lots of things I could have asked you, but is there one thing that you thought, oh, darn, we
Mm.
didn't talk about that?
Okay, good question. Um, yes, and it's something like this. Let me try and articulate it. Um, I think for me, the book is a psychosynthesis, and the book is about wholeness and about a participation in a wider life. It's a presentation of psychotherapy and psychosynthesis psychotherapy in particular, the work and the client in relationship, not just to their inner experience, their feelings and thoughts and memories of the past, and not just in relationship to the therapist, but to situate them in the world, to situate them in an experiential context, and to recognize that that world is impinging upon them all the time, as we mentioned earlier. In a sense, it's my attempt to turn inside out the tendency in therapeutic circles to assume that psychological life is a sort of personal or subjective. I really don't think it's experienced like that. You don't live your psychological life inside. You live your what is psychological life? It's not inside you, and it's certainly not separate from the world. Psychological life, as I describe it in the book, is a network of relationships.
Mm.
And we notice and strengthen or heal our psychological life, our psychological sufferings, by bringing attention to those relationships and tending to them. So not just the relationship to self, but like personal self, but relationships to the therapist, but also relationships to families and friends, pets,
Mm.
window boxes, the relationship to the street, the relationship to the local park, the relationship to our memories, of course, but also our relationship to the future, our relationship to technology. We're surrounded by relationships. Where I go to at the end of the book is that there's no real center. If you follow that through, there, it's like you're not the center of control in this experience. There is in psychosynthesis a lot of talk about a center and the idea that you can control your experience. But I bring that into question in the book because it seems to me we've been and control our experience. I don't think you can fully understand your experience because it is a mystery. And I love that life is a mystery. It's not to say you can't learn things. It's not to say that you can't grow in understanding, but you can't pin everything down, and you certainly can't predict or control the future. And trying to do both those things arguably just makes things worse. So I've tried to present an approach to therapy and illustrate it with clinical examples and transcripts and theory that allows people to live in the mystery and to participate in the mystery that is life. He is at pains to point out that psychosynthesis takes us to the door of the mystery, but it doesn't purport to explain that mystery away. It doesn't try to give um, explanations.
Yeah.
It's avoidant of positioning itself as a dogma or physics or even a religion. It's profoundly respective of the experience as primary. Because as soon as you start to explain it away, you move into an abstract conceptual terrain that's separate from the experience. It's the difference between enjoying a movie and getting carried away with the movie and reading a review of the movie or a sunset. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't look at a sunset. You don't look at a sunset. I use this analogy in the book. You don't look at a sunset and think, why is that sunset there? Or what does this mean to me? Or what part of me does the sunset represent? That's a nonsense. That would kill the satisfaction and the subtle sense of beauty or wonder or awe or maybe grief or
Mm.
bittersweetness that comes when you pause, like that moment you had in the consulting room on Tooley Street. There's a soulfulness, there's an experiential richness that we can have when we it's not that there isn't thought there. There are thoughts within that experience. A sunset. And I hope that if people read the book, they'll come away with that sense of living in the mystery and participating in the mystery, and how the danger of these wonderful concepts and ideas and theories and techniques can get in the way of that unduly. And that's not really what they're about. They're meant to be there to help us live the mystery. They're just a working hypothesis, I call them. They're not something like that.
No, absolutely. And we'll get that participation mystique from seeing, hopefully seeing the therapist. Let's plug psychotherapy. Declaration of interest. I am a therapist. I do promote psychotherapy. And there are benefits to in that participation mystique that you get from speaking and talking to an individual that you don't get from an AI bot, right? That's informed by all the best clinical examples and it'll give you all the latest research, but you're
Well,
missing
the,
that
the, the AI
interaction.
the AI bot will, I mean, normally that's just people typing things in. I think at best it's listening to your speech, but the AI bot is not in the room with you. It's not noticing your facial expression.
Yeah.
It's not smelling you. It doesn't notice when you it's not noticing that your foot's tapping on the ground or that you're restless in the chair or that you've suddenly sat back in the chair. Um, and it's not taking you in an embodied fashion. It's not in relationship to you.
Mm.
It's a very thin bit of information it's taking from you, which is just your words. And often it doesn't even ask you questions. It doesn't really think about you in the way that a therapist would. It's not offering you a relationship. So I think an AI bot can do procedural technique-based therapy, but as we've discussed in this episode, the limitations of that are that you're treating the person like a machine. You're just taking them through these steps.
Yeah.
That's a very reduced and even dangerous sideshow, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Alan, it's been a wonderful experience chatting to you. Let's just remind everyone that the book is out there. Where can they get hold of it?
Um, I've got a website called wildimagination.uk, all lowercase, one word, .uk, wildimagination.uk. So you can click through to the buying the book from the publisher there if you want, or you can get it on Amazon. There's a Kindle version. And you can also follow along. I have my podcast called the Psychosynthesis Sessions on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. You can check that out, and we've been talking about the book more there. But yeah, do find out, and yeah, if people are watching this, hello, thanks for getting to the end.
Yes, and
Uh,
persevering with the unstable internet connection.
it's been fairly stable on my end. But yeah, thanks for listening to the end, and see you around somewhere in Zoom, elsewhere, or in the real world. Thanks, Noel.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and we will. I hope we will chat again, but and sooner than another five
I'll
and a
try
half
and
years.
write the next book in less than 5.
Brilliant. I think it just broke there, but you were saying you'll try and write the book less than 5 years' time.
Yeah, do it sooner next time. Yeah, I've started.
Get you. Thanks again, Alan,
Thank you.
and good luck with your next project.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.